Hello, welcome to Apex Math. Today's lesson we are going to focus on graphing quadratic equations. We're going to look at this from a level for students in Common Core Math 2 or Algebra 2. Students who are currently in an Algebra 1 class would have to have been already working with quadratics for a while, know how to factor them, work with them, etc. But may be appropriate at that point in time for an Algebra 1 student. All right, so let's get started here. And the first thing we do is I'm going to give us an equation that we're going to work with. We are going to work with graphing y equals x squared plus 4x plus minus 5. And we know this is a quadratic equation because it has an x squared. And the first thing a student should know when they're going to graph a quadratic is what are the pieces that I need to find in order to graph this equation. So you need to know that you're going to want to have the y-intercept, and that's easy to find when this is given to you in standard form. You may find that these equations are given to you sometime in standard form and sometimes in vertex form. So depending on how it's given to you, the approach may be different. The second thing you're going to want are your x-intercepts, and that requires that you know how to solve quadratics. The third thing is that you're able to find the vertex of a quadratic equation. Fourth is that from that vertex you're able to find the axis of symmetry, and that's pretty easy once you have the vertex. And then lastly is sometimes we need some additional points that's not enough to figure out exactly how wide our graph is, etc. So we might need a table of values as well. So we should know how to do that. So go ahead and pause your video and jot down these things so that you know every time I graph a quadratic, these are the things that I want to make sure I find. Okay, so let's rewrite our equation again. Y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5. And we're going to start off by finding that y-intercept. Let's talk about intercepts for a minute. Anytime you hear the word intercept, you should think zeros. Intercepts are where one of the value is 0 and the other value is a number. So if you're trying to find a y-intercept, then you let x be 0 and you figure out what the value of y is when x is 0. And if you want the x-intercept, then you're going to do the opposite. You're going to let y equal 0 and find out what is the value or values of x when y is 0. So let's start off with the y-intercept. It's very easy to find in this form. So the y-intercept means we want to find y, so therefore we're going to let x equal 0. So y is going to be 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 5. And these guys all cross off because they're all zeros. And essentially, it's going to just be the constant here. So negative 5. So our y-intercept, put it up here, our y-intercept is negative 5. All right, now let's look for what is our x-intercept. Well, like I said, we're thinking zeros here, so we want we're going to be finding the x value, so we're going to let y be 0 this time, and we're going to solve for x. But the thing you should know is that if we have a squared and we're solving for x, that means we should get 2 answers. If you have a squared, you get 2 answers. If you have it to the first power, you get 1 answer. To the third power, you get 3 answers. So we are going to be finding 2 x-intercepts because x is squared. So this is a quadratic, and it's set equal to 0. So you should immediately know that to solve a quadratic equation, the first step is to set it equal to 0. So we already have completed our first step. And what are the ways to solve a quadratic? Well, we can factor, we can complete the square, or we can use the quadratic formula. And there may be some other ways, but those are the 3 we're going to deal with here. So let's first see if we can factor, because that's always the easiest approach if that's something that's doable. So to factor, remember, you can watch our videos if you're not good at factoring. We have some great videos to teach you to factor, because factoring is actually much easier than you might realize. If this is a 1 here, factoring is quite easy. If this is not a 1 in front of the x squared, there's a couple extra steps, but even then, it's still easy. Watch our video on learning how to do bottoms up for factoring when the leading coefficient, this number in front of the x squared, is not a 1. But in this case, it is a 1. So that means factoring is just a couple steps. We're just going to simply take this final number, the -5, and we're going to ask ourselves, are there 2 numbers that will multiply together to give me a -5, but add together to give me this middle number of a +4. So if I think about the factors of 5, I only really have 2 choices, 5 and 1. But I want to multiply to get a -5 and add to get a +4. So I would have to put a positive on my 5 and a negative on my 1. That way, when I multiply them, I get a negative number, but when I add +5 plus a -1, I get a +4. Once I have those 2 values there, I simply factor it into x plus 5 times x minus 1 equals 0. Or the shortcut is, I love to teach shortcuts, so please watch our videos and learn all the shortcuts. The shortcut is, the solution is just these numbers with their opposite signs. So since this is a -1, one of our x-intercepts is going to be a +1. And since this is a +5, the other x-intercept is going to be a -5. So now we have found our 2 x-intercepts. So our x-intercepts are +1 and -5. So let's go ahead and erase what we have here. And we will move on to our next step. All right, we said that the other thing we need is to find a vertex. So there's a couple different ways we can find a vertex. So finding a vertex is one way is to complete the square. And if you don't know how to complete the square, we have a video on that. And again, it's not really a hard process, and you're going to need to learn it eventually anyway in order to complete high school. So I recommend you might as well learn it now because it's very helpful in solving quadratics and finding vertexes. So if it's not required now, you might as well go ahead and take the time to learn it. The other is to use a formula, but then you have to remember that for the test. The formula is negative b over 2a is equal to x. So those are your two choices for finding the vertex. So we'll go ahead and do both. And I think I am going to go ahead and write this down again. Making notes on this will make it easier for you. So let's use the negative b over 2a first, and then we will go ahead and talk about completing the square as well. So if I use x equals negative b over 2a to find my vertex, then a is the value in front of the x squared, just like in the quadratic formula. B is the value in front of the x, and c is the constant, including the sign, so it would be negative 5. So applying that here, I would have negative b, so that's negative 4, over 2 times a, which is 1. So I get negative 4 over 2, which is a negative 2. That is the x-coordinate of my vertex. So I now have to plug that in to find the y-coordinate. So I'm going to do y equals negative 2. Make sure you always put negative numbers in parentheses. Squared plus 4 times negative 2 minus 5. So negative 2 squared is positive 4. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And then we have minus 5. So combining these two, we get a negative 4 minus 5. I always do switch change, which means I'm going to change this to a positive and this to its opposite. That allows me to change all my subtraction problems to addition problems, and I'm much less likely to make a mistake. So I have negative 4 plus negative 5, so that's equal to negative 9. So my vertex is going to be at negative 2, comma, negative 9. Now let's also learn how to do it using completing the square. To complete the square approach, you're going to put this in vertex form. And some teachers just require you to learn how to put it in vertex form anyway. So, to complete the square, we're going to take and bring that constant over to the other side of the equation. So it was a minus 5. So to bring it to the other side of the equal sign, we would have to do its inverse operation, which is plus 5. What I do to one side of the equation, I do to the other. So I have x squared plus 4x, now with a little space here, equals 5. So to complete the square, I look at my b number. And so I have b equals 4. And then I take 1/2 b. 1/2 b is 2. Then I take 1/2 b and I square it. So 2 squared is 4. And I add that value to both sides of the equation. So I'm going to do plus 4, plus 4. The next thing I do is I factor the left-hand side. The left-hand side, though, factors into x plus the 1/2 b squared. So I don't have to think. I just have to go to this value right here that I've already found and say x plus 2 squared equals 9. Now, I'm running out of room, so let me erase a little bit here. And I bring this 9 back over to this side of the equation. So to do that, I would subtract 9, and I'd subtract 9. So now I have x plus 2 squared minus 9. And this is called vertex form. Vertex form is x minus h squared plus k. So, using that information, I can now just look at the equation and figure out what my vertex is. Since this is a minus h and this is a plus 2, I have to switch the sign of the number there. So this is going to be a negative 2. Since this is a plus k and this is a minus 9, I have to actually this would be a plus a minus 9. So that means I want to take the minus 9 as my number here. So I get my vertex as negative 2, negative 9. So either way we get the same vertex. So let's go ahead now and work on our final step, which is graphing and seeing if we need additional values to finish our problem. Okay, so I'm going to draw an axis here. Now, one other thing to note is whether or not our parabola is opening up or down. If the number in front of the x squared is positive, it's going to open up. And if it's negative, it's going to open down. So in our case, we are going to expect it to open up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and graph negative 2, negative 9. So I'm going to go negative 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that is my point right there. Now I'm going to graph my two x-intercepts. So one of them is at negative 5. So that's 3, 4, 5. That's that point right there. And the other one is at 1, which is that point there. The y-intercept is at negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's that point there. Now we didn't yet talk about the axis of symmetry. Once you have your vertex, the axis of symmetry is just x equals whatever the x value is. And whenever you write it, you can't just write it as a number because it's an actual line. So you have to write x equals -2 or x equals whatever that value is here. And we represent it usually with a dotted line. And it helps us to graph any additional points that we might need. So if you see here, we have this point on the y-axis. So how many points away is it from our axis of symmetry? Well, we have 1 here and 2. So it is, and I always go by what I call bunny hops. 1, 2 bunny hops away from our axis of symmetry. So we can create a point that's going to match it using symmetry by doing 2 additional bunny hops, 1, 2, right here. So that helps us be able to, again, create a smoother looking graph to make sure we're going through the right points. So we have this, we have that, whoops, we have this one here. So let's get a different color for our final picture. I guess we'll do it in white here. So we have this picture. Oops, didn't mean to move the whole thing. There we go. Okay, so we have found that we open up, we found the vertex. I'm going to label some of this here. So this is our vertex. This dotted line here is our axis of symmetry. These 2 points here are our x-intercepts. This was our y-intercept. This point here was our symmetrical point that we used from the axis of symmetry from the y-intercept to find the point on the other side. And that is sufficient number of points to be able to graph our graph of y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5. Now there's some more points of things that might happen when you're graphing this. For instance, if you try to graph and you find out there are no x-intercepts, that will mean that your graph never touches, your parabola never touches the x-axis, that it is, I can draw a little one here, say a parabola that looks like this. It's way up there. So there are the situations where you won't find x-intercepts. And so that means that that graph will just have to be graphed above, or it could be down here, could be below, but it will never go through that x-axis. So those are other things that can happen when graphing your quadratics. But there's a lot involved, and making sure you understand the different steps as you go through this will make sure you have success in your class and in your graphing of quadratic equations. So I hope this was helpful, and I am going to go put some notes on our website. Our website is www.apex- don't forget the dash, math.com, and I'm going to get some study notes on the website for you where it tells you what to look for when graphing these quadratics. So please like our videos and give us some comments on any future videos you'd like to see. Thank you for coming and visiting us at Apex Math.